Greetings, travelers! Welcome back to Tales from the Enchanted Forest podcast with your hosts, Fox and Sparrow.
Howdy, travelers. Welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to have you all here today. And it's not just because I've got exciting stuff in my life today, but I'm just very excited to be here.
Yay! Did you want to talk about the exciting stuff in your life, or did you want to talk about the weather?
I mean, the weather is always an exciting part of my life. But the new exciting thing for me is that I'm going to be picking up some cats that I'm adopting today. So today's a very exciting day for me. That, yes, a sparrow is adopting some cats. So that works out. Don't worry about it.
But that's okay. The number of pets in the Enchanted Forest goes up and down constantly. Sometimes fictional ones, but most of the time it's nice to have our own pets here as well. So I'm happy that you are picking up some more kittens to add to the Enchanted Forest family.
Yeah. So I'm very excited. Unfortunately, I don't think our cats are ever going to get to meet each other, but we can just in our hearts know that they would totally be best friends.
Well, they can be best friends through the amount of times we can hear them meowing in the podcast audio.
This is true. This may be the last time I have a quiet recording. And in future edits, I'll just have to be editing around the meow.
I mean, my cat doesn't really sound like a meow. Hers sounds like a chirp. My cat chirps.
My old cat always sounded like, eh, eh. It was always like a squeak.
Yeah, Cassandra does that as well. But either way, I have a very exciting story for you guys today. I was really inspired by the Betrothed of Destiny story that we told the other time, and I really like the idea of having the princesses, or the maidens, dressing up and taking charge of their own story. And so in honor of Pride Month, I was really looking for some interesting stories that had maybe a little bit more, I was looking for a story that had some more undertones. And I have discovered an entire folklore type. So for those of you who don't know or are new, we sometimes will reference the ATU, so the Arne Thompson Uther classification system for folklore and fairy tale types. And I found a new one called ATU 514, and this is called the shift of sex. So these stories are often stories where something happens throughout the story and the male character becomes a female character or the female character becomes a male character. Usually it's through a curse. And what I found interesting is just how far-reaching this ATU type was. So you can find it all over Europe. Finland has 17 tales with this type. Turkey has 13. Lithuania has 10. Denmark has 9. Greece and Poland have about 6. But I mean, that's not including the Greek myths, because there's lots of changes and stuff, and metamorphosis that happens in the Greek myths. Romania, the one that we have today is from Romania, but Romania has these tales. And then you also see them in Spain, Portugal, Cape Verde, Mexico, Chile, Indonesia, Malaysia. So that's really interesting to me, just because I didn't think I'd find anything outside of the Greek myths, of course. And most of the time, they do follow a similar trope of the girl who pretended to be a boy because of circumstances that required her father to have a son. And if you don't know, this is actually something that in some cultures, it's what you do when you're young and your father doesn't have a son and you need to have a son around for specific tasks, usually in kind of misogynistic societies, really. In Afghanistan, we have something called bacha posh, which is like a young girl who dresses as a boy. And she does this because she needs to work or she needs to be able to go and buy things and run errands and help her father, but girls aren't allowed to do that. So it's one of those things that, like, it might have come from a tradition that happened. It might have come from just girls disguising themselves as men in order to do certain things as well within society. But I just thought it was really interesting because as soon as I started reading the stories, I was like, well, this sounds exactly like this tradition. And I don't know if you've ever read this, but I remember in school we read a book called The Breadwinner by Deborah Ellis. And it was about a young Afghan girl who had to dress as a boy in order to survive in society. And so I thought that was quite interesting. most of the time it's because there's some need, but then in some of the stories, the girl genuinely wants to dress like a guy and go and do these things and live as a man.
I think I remember that book. Like, it was like one of the books that another class had to read for English, but then we read something like, I don't know. I'm actually just blanking on all the books I read in high school. It's like I've successfully blocked out. Whatever the 19-something dystopian book is, I don't remember the exact year. 1984, is it?
Yeah, that one was by George Orwell.
Yeah, I did not like that book, but I remember being forced to read it. And then I think of spite, I did not finish it and failed the test for it because I really didn't like it.
You didn't read 1984? I love that book.
I read half of it, and then I really decided I was going to accept the fail on the test, and just I spark notes the rest of it. Yeah, I was that student. I read most of the books I was assigned in class, but I just remember that being like one of the last ones I had to read, and I was like, you know what? I'm good. No.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that because even as someone who teaches English literature, I feel that some of the books that the kids have to read, they're either not taught in an interesting way, so the kids don't care about it, or the book isn't relevant to, like they aren't being taught in a way that makes the books relevant. Because I know that when I recently taught 1984, the way that we taught it was very focused on current affairs. Even when we did The Handmaid's Tale, again, focused on the current political crisis, the current things that are happening, drawing comparisons between the current day systems and the book. Whereas I remember when we learned it in school, we really focused on the past. And that is, I mean, that's exactly where Orwell is pulling it from, right? But Orwell wasn't just talking about the past. He was also talking about systems that could happen. And so I remember when we were reading it, we spent so much time talking about Russia and Stalin and communism, and we didn't really talk about how it affected us nowadays. Whereas now I think the way we teach it is so much better because we still talk about the past, but we draw those comparisons to the present. And so kids have a reason to want to read and, you know, to genuinely get scared because so much of it is the same.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I really think it's about how you teach a book. And I feel like when you have a passionate teacher, most of the time they can make the book really interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we just finished doing Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, and it's interesting to have those conversations about slavery. But in the country I'm in, they don't really understand slavery to the same extent that we do in Canada. So it's interesting to have those conversations, but then at the same time to be like, this is the basis of the story, but here I have to explain all of this to you first.
I remember like a time I was in Japan and I was watching, like, I was staying with like a family and they watched the movie Sully. I'm not sure if you've ever seen that movie. It's Tom Hanks, but it's about the pilot who like the birds got into the engine and like damaged it, so the plane had to go down, but it was like flying over New York at the time, so it landed on the river. But I remember like they were trying to understand like the specifics of why people were like super freaked out about this. And I was like, well, 9/11 was not too long ago when this thing happened. So people were super freaked out and trying to explain all of that other context and be like, so when this happened, this was really bad for them. This really was not good.
I mean, it does seem a bit like it does always not shock me, but it always comes as a bit of a surprise when someone mentions something as if it's common knowledge. And I realize that it's common knowledge for them because they grew up here and they know the history and they know the system really well, whereas I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah.
Whereas when someone mentions something else from American culture, I can quite quickly realize where it's from and what it means, but then I have to explain it to them because we grow up learning about these systems and what happened and the history. And they grow up learning a bit of it, but it's not centered on America because why would it be? They're in Europe.
Yeah, they're our neighbor, our only neighbor.
To see well, yeah, but it's interesting to see, like, even my husband, like, there's always information that he knows. Do you know how they know the color? Do you know how they say the colors of the rainbow in the UK?
How? I'm scared.
Richard of York gave battle in vain.
What? They don't just do Roy G. Biv?
Yeah, I was like, because I was like, so Roji Biv. And he was like, no, it's Richard of York gave battle in vain. I was like, what a weird little mnemonic device. But he was like, yeah, it's Richard of York gave battle in vain. I'm like, well, it's true. It teaches you about Richard of York, but also the colors of the rainbow, apparently. But I just think those little things are so fun to see how people remember things differently. So the story we're going to tell today is the Romanian story of the princess who would be a prince, or Ileana of the Golden Tresses. This story was first written by Petre Inspirescu between 1872 and 1886. But the version that we're going to tell comes from some different sources that were translated. So one of them is The Foundling Prince and Other Tales that was translated by Julia Collier Harris and Rhea Ipcar. So without further ado, I hope we will all get comfy and settle in to hear the story, which, to be fair, is really long and in two parts because I wanted to make sure we cover everything. Because the princess who would be a prince really has to work for her happy ending. I'll tell you that. So settle in and enjoy part one of The Princess Who Would Be a Prince. There was once an emperor so powerful that his empire soon stretched far and wide, even to the spot where the devil weaned his children. And from every kingdom he conquered, he demanded that a prince of that land be sent to his court and held as a hostage for 10 years. In all of the emperor's years as a conqueror, only one kingdom successfully resisted his forces. The king or the emperor of this land was dedicated to his people with such loyalty that he would rather cut himself in quarters than let any calamity befall his subjects. However, time is the cruelest conqueror, and a time came when the king was feeble and old. Despite how hard he fought, he had to relinquish his power to the empire eventually. He did this willingly, knowing that his people would be spared, but one thing preyed on his mind. How would he pay the hostage price of a son when he only had 3 daughters? He lived in fear that the emperor would think he was a rebel and force him and his daughters out to die in misery and shame. The king's 3 daughters noticed the heavy cloud over their father and tried their utmost to bring him happiness and relief, but to no avail. Seeing that nothing could make him smile, one day his eldest daughter took his hands and asked him what ailed him. Was it the empire or something they had done? If only he would tell them what poisoned his heart, then they would do anything and everything to help him, because they loved him more than life itself. He sighed deeply and told them that he loved them, and their accomplishments were numerous, but for all that they knew and all that they achieved, they did not know how to flourish a saber or wield arms. The girls begged their father to just get on with it and tell them what the problem was. He told them that time had withered his blood, and he could no longer hold his mace as before. Strained soldiers now watered their horses at his wells, because they no longer feared coming onto his lands. Even the stags roamed carelessly in the forest, knowing they did not have to fear his arrows any longer. Even he, the protector of his lands, had bowed his head to the emperor and given up his lands to the all-powerful enemy. The only thing he could not give was a son as a hostage, and he told his daughters that he feared what would happen to them if he did not.
It's funny, like, the things that he is so far listing, like, oh no, like, they don't fear us. It's like, you could totally teach one of your daughters at least how to fight or shoot an arrow, and, like, some of this, like, obviously the son hostage thing is one thing, but you could have at least, like, helped with these other stuff. He just taught them a little bit of, like, how to defend themselves or fight.
Give him a second. He's getting his montage coming up.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting ahead of it. Please continue.
It's okay, let him. He should have done it before. I think, knowing that this emperor was coming for his lands and he would have to give it up at some point, you would think he would have taken some more precaution. But
yeah,
he does get his training montage.
Oh, I can't wait.
At this, his eldest daughter sprang up and declared that she would go. When her father protested, she said that she was a princess and his daughter. Was that not enough? She told him to let her go, and She told her father to let her go, and he would never have cause to blush for her. At last, her father was convinced, and she set about making preparations to pretend to be a young prince. The brave girl was filled with joy and happiness to do this. She skipped and danced as she arranged for fine embroidered clothing and the most mettlesome horse from their stables. Her father instructed her on how to hide her real sex and how to act like a fine young man. When it was time for her to go, she sped ahead of her escort, and she would have left them behind had she not caught herself and drawn in. Now the old king, in truth, was a magician, but no one knew, including his own daughters. It was how he had fended off the great emperor for so long. He waited until his daughter and her escort had a lead before he followed them with his plan to test her. On the second day of their journey, he rode ahead of the princess and threw up a bridge of brass and then shifted into a wolf to hide underneath. Soon, the princess rode near and she pressed on over the bridge. However, when she was halfway through, a wolf jumped up from underneath and bared its ferocious teeth at her. The princess was paralyzed, and although the princess was paralyzed in fright, and although she did not even think to flee, her horse panicked, and in her surprise, she spurred the horse back. They galloped all the way to her father's palace, where her father, who had returned with his magic, met her at the gates. She was distraught at her failure and cried that she did not know that she would encounter wild beasts on her way to the emperor. Her father just gently told her that all the flies in the world cannot make honey and advised her to rest at home. The matter was dropped, but soon his second daughter begged to try, and her father could not say no. His middle daughter also set off with arms, training, a gallant stallion, and excitement, only to return back in a panic after encountering the wolf on the brass bridge. Her father welcomed her back and told her that no one could catch all the birds that fly. Finally, the youngest daughter asked to have a go and reckoned that she could trap that old wolf no problem. Her father laughed at his youngest daughter's arrogance. He asked how she could speak so bravely about a poor old wolf when she hardly knew which hand to use to eat her porridge. His youngest prettily told him that for her father she would fight the devil or even turn into the devil herself. She had all the will in the world. Seeing her speak, her father lovingly gave in, but warned her that he would laugh long when she had to return, with her head down and her eyes downcast. His youngest daughter only replied that as long as he was laughing, then that would have been enough for her. So,
Aww.
with her father's blessings, I know, that was so cute. I was like, these girls are so wholesome.
I
I love father-daughter bonds. I mean, the moms are always dead in these fairy tales anyway, so they never get a chance. But
Yeah.
It's nice to see a father that's not, weird or
like trying to force them into marriages.
Yeah, trying to be like, well, let's make an alliance. Instead,
Yeah.
he's letting them actually have a go. And he is encouraging them. He's giving them all that they need to be successful, but he's not going to blindly just let them go. And so he's still giving them a test to make sure that they're ready.
Yeah, but I do wonder what he's thinking the alternative is going to be if they all failed this test. Like, what's going to happen, man? What are you going to do?
I don't know. I think they're both a bad situation, because if he sends his daughters out and they aren't ready and they can't fight and they can't hold their own, then he might be worried about what will happen to them once they get to the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he's obviously going to have to deal with the fact that he doesn't have any sons once the time comes. So it's one or the other.
I'm surprised he's not going with I'm going to adopt the stable boy and quickly say that he's my heir.
That would have also worked, probably. So with her father's blessings, she went about making her preparations. The youngest daughter went to the stables like her older sisters had done, but she searched and searched for the perfect horse, bypassing all the young steeds until she found a famous old war horse. It was her father's horse, and as she watched him, the horse turned to her and spoke. He remarked that her eyes were so soft and full of compassion for the love of her father. He understood that feeling well, since he had ridden into many battles with the king, but now the king and his steed were old. The horse promised that if the princess cared for him, then he would measure up to any of the young war horses in 10 days. So the princess followed his instructions, and by the 10th day, she could hardly recognize the noble steed that stood before her.
Aww. It's a horse girl story.
I mean, it genuinely is a horse girl story.
It's so cute. Love it.
Once she had her horse, she consulted with him and asked which wise counselor she should choose as her advisor. The horse told her to choose none of them, and instead he would advise her. So with just her horse and a small selection of simple clothing that a young man would wear, she set off. Her father bid her farewell and then set out to run his test one more time. While they were on the road, the clever horse spoke softly to the girl and told her that no matter what came before them, it was a test of her courage and that she should use her resolve and quick thinking, for he would not fail her. Soon they came upon the wolf, and even though the princess had heard all about it from her sisters, the sight of it still made her tremble. However, she resolved her courage and charged ahead with her saber out, just as her father had taught her. Had the wolf not sprang out of the way, she would have sliced him open, but luckily for the old king, she did not try and take another swipe. Instead, she bolted away. Proud and rejoicing in his daughter's courage, the king hurried ahead to set up a silver bridge and hide underneath it as a lion. When the princess rode up, the lion sprang out and roared, but she was prepared for it this time and swiped with her saber. Once again, the old king had to shrink back or risk getting quartered as the princess charged past him and into the wild. Once she got away, the horse slowed to a trot, and both the rider and the steed took in the world around them. For the first time in her life, the princess was beyond the sight of her home. With the wolf and the lion behind her, she drank in the springtime and grew tempted to lie in a field or gather some of the sweet-smelling flowers around her. But her horse rescued her from the spell. He did not let her slide off or wander towards the sounds of a rushing waterfall. Instead, he kept a steady pace and gave her all the advice he knew about the knights, and what to act like in order to keep up with the other princes. While they traveled, the old king hurried ahead to lay his final test. He created a golden bridge, and this time he disguised himself as a fearsome dragon with 12 heads. When his daughter finally crested the hill and took in the dreadful sight, he sprang into view and roared. The girl felt terror like she had never felt before, but with her horse guiding her, she pressed her knees into his side and charged up. Their fight lasted an hour, and by the end of it, the maiden and the dragon were exhausted. She had worked with her horse to sever the heads and move into vantage points over and over. Finally, she gave the dragon a mortal blow, and with a roar that split the heavens, the dragon fell over himself. To her amazement, as the dragon collapsed, it shrank and turned into a man, her very own father. Half in amazement and half in reverence, the girl bent to one knee as she received her father's final blessing. He knew now that she was the bravest of them all, and would one day return to her kingdom. So the princess, who would be a prince, set off to face the empire.
Oh my gosh, did he die?
No,
Okay.
he survived. I think it was just like the dragon form died, and then he turned back into the king, and he gave her the blessing.
Okay.
The final blessing to indicate that his tests were now done.
Oh, okay. Fine. Not his,
I can see how that sounds.
Final...
No, he didn't die. It would have been awful for him to be like, and for my final test, you must kill me.
Yeah, but like, let's be real. A lot of dumb fathers would set that as their test, right? Like, yes. Okay, glad that that's not where this went.
But I think it's just a way to show the transition of power going from the old king and all his power going to a young version, which is his daughter, his heir, I guess.
Yeah. Also, that really escalated quickly when you said, like, wolf and then lion. I was really expecting it to be a bear, and then you're like, a dragon came out. I was like, yes.
12-head dragon.
12-headed dragon. Good thing it wasn't, like, an actual hydra, though, because that would have been much more challenging.
No, he was like, here's a power scale.
Yeah, we're just gonna crank that up. This is like a DM who's like, wait, they're destroying everything too quickly. We gotta, like, kick this into high gear.
He also trained her, and I'm assuming trained her against other knights and people, and then all of a sudden he's like, and here are some wild beasts. Go for it.
Have fun.
Well, it's a good thing he did, as you'll see.
Ooh.
So she traveled far, and one day she came upon the mountains that held up the roof of the world. There, she saw 2 genies who had been fighting for nearly 2 years. When they saw her, they paused, and thinking her to be a young prince looking for a quest, begged her to choose their side. One offered her a horn that could be heard as far as a 3-day journey, while the other offered her a horse named Sunbeam. After consulting with her horse, who revealed that Sunbeam was actually his brother, she chose the horse and killed the other genie.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, now it's double the horse girl.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking.
When she went to retrieve the horse, the genie's mother offered her a place to stay for the night. Unlike her son, the genie's mother knew at once that this was no prince, but a princess, and a fine one at that. Once the princess had gone to check on her horse, the genie's mother told her son that he had been saved by a girl, and what a fine wife she would make. Not believing his mother, the two set up a flower that would die by a man's bed but remain alive near a maiden's. However, the horse had warned the princess to watch out for such tricks. So that night, she swapped her flowers with the genie's until her flowers were dead too, and then returned both sets to their rightful spots. In the morning, the genie's mother was annoyed to see that the two sets of flowers were dead. But still, she was resolute that their guest was a maiden. For their second test, the genie took the maiden into the garden and asked her to please pluck some flowers for him. But the princess sensed a ruse and scoffed at the notion. Why would she waste her time picking flowers? Finally, for their last test, the genie offered his savior any weapon from his armory, hoping that her choice would betray her sex. But she simply examined every blade and then chose the plainest Damascus blade, full of rust. This move confused the genie, but he decided that only a seasoned warrior would choose such a weapon and was convinced that this was a man. His mother was less convinced, but decided that even if the man was a maid, she was the shrewdest and most cunning of them all. The next day, they bid her goodbye, and she set off with her horse and her new steed, Sunbeam. Once they were on the road, her old war horse told her that now that he knew that she was with his brother, he would be happy to return to her father so that she would not be slowed down. He advised her to continue listening to Sunbeam for advice and good counsel. The princess was sad to hear of this and was reluctant to let her horse go, but she knew that he loved her father and wanted to return to his kingdom to age in peace.
Aww.
Sunbeam declared that he would do everything in his power to protect and advise her, so the two bid farewell to the old warhorse and went on their way. They rode on and on towards the empire. At a certain point in the road, they suddenly came across a golden lock of hair. The princess asked if she should take it, and the horse replied that if she did, she would regret it, but if she didn't, she would also regret it. So he advised her to pick it up before they continued on their way. After traveling for an age, they finally came to the court of the all-powerful emperor and his hostage princes. When the princess came in to receive the new prince, they all seemed drawn to the boy, and they didn't know why. When she was presented to the emperor, he quickly grew attached to her charm, intelligence, and nobility, so he assigned her as his royal companion. In truth, the princess was happy with this because she did not want to be among her fellow princes. 1, because she feared they would discover her real gender, and 2, because they were an idle lot. So with her horse and her charms, the princess who would be a prince settled in for life over the next 10 years. And this brings us to the end of part 1. The story is truly long, but definitely a story worth telling. So we will have to see you in part 2 to uncover the mystery of the golden locks and what happens to the princess.
Oh man, I really like where this is going so far. This has got a lot of good elements. You know, she's a horse girl, horse dude. But also, I do have a question. What would be a weapon that you would choose that would make you think, ah, yes, this person is a female. This is definitely not a male.
I think they were hoping that she would pick something pink. I don't know. I truly don't know. I think they were maybe hoping that she would pick something that was ornamental, or that she would pick something that was kind of useless or maybe full of gems but not practical, to kind of give away. I mean, I think all 3 tests, except maybe the flower one, were a bit weird.
Yep.
Because at least the flower one, you had an element of magic to it. But they went from a magical test to then being like, oh, do you want to pick some flowers? And she's like, no. And he was like, you must be a man. What man would want to pick flowers?
You're not fitting a stereotype.
Yeah, so I think they definitely do lean into, I mean, to be fair, in the very beginning when she was riding her horse and she realized that she was as far away from home as she'd ever been, one of her very first instincts was to, go find some waterfalls and go and pick some flowers. But her horse was like, no, we have a trip.
That's true.
So he wasn't wrong. It definitely does lead itself into the stereotypes a little bit. But, I mean, I feel like if I was in a meadow full of flowers and I was like completely by myself for the very first time in my life, I would also want to, take a moment, enjoy the spring, enjoy the new environment. But at this time, she knew. She's like, this is a trick. You want me to pick a flower? Ha. I'm a boy. I would never.
Wells, you're not going to trick me. Girl power. I mean, guy power.
Yes. I mean, 10 years is a long time to pull this off, so we'll see how she does.
Yeah.
But that brings us to the end of part 1. We hope that you will join us for part 2, where we continue the story of the princess who would be a prince. In the meantime, to help you with your long wait, which isn't 10 years, but still, 2 weeks is a long time, then you can always head over to our website, www.talesmanchantforest.com, to see any of our other show notes and everything else that we have going on. You can also reach us anytime over our social media. We are on Bluesky, Mastodon, TikTok, Instagram, at From Enchanted or at From Tales from Enchanted Forest. However, if you are old school like Sparrow, then you can also reach us on talesmanenchantedforest@gmail.com. You can send us your comments, questions, and suggestions, as well as your predictions for next week's tale. Do you think that the princess will find out who these golden locks belong to? Do you think that she'll kill the emperor and get her kingdom back? Who knows? So we'll see you then.
And remember, there's always a place for you in the Enchanted Forest.